It started the way it always did, with tension heavy enough to choke on. He sat across from me at the long wooden table, shoulders squared, jaw tight, pretending that I didn't exist even though every move I made seemed to irritate him. We were paired together for the group project no one else wanted to touch, locked in the quiet library after hours because the deadline had crept too close. It wasn't the first time we'd been forced into the same space, and every time the air felt like it could shatter at the slightest spark. We had been rivals since the first week I'd met him. I can't even remember what started it. Maybe a debate in class that turned into a full-on argument. Maybe the fact that he always managed to be one step ahead of me in everything that mattered. Whatever it was, we'd spent months locked in this unspoken competition, taking jabs in ways that were almost casual but always sharp. His smirk when he got a higher grade, my sarcastic comments when he stumbled. It was our language. And now here we were, two enemies trapped in silence, pretending not to notice how close we were sitting. The library lights hummed above us, casting a pale glow on the stacks of papers between us. I tried to focus. Really, I did. But every time he leaned forward, the fabric of his shirt stretched across his back in a way that caught my eye before I could stop it. My gaze lingered on the slope of his shoulders, the sharp line of his jaw when he bent his head toward his laptop. I hated that I noticed. I hated even more that I couldn't stop. He must have felt my glance, because he looked up suddenly. Our eyes met, just for a second, and it was enough to send a strange jolt through me. I cleared my throat, staring down at the page in front of me. His lips twitched like he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. "You're not even paying attention," he said quietly, his voice lower than usual. It wasn't mocking this time, more matter of fact. I muttered, scribbling nonsense in the margin of my notebook just to prove a point. Maybe if he didn't hog all the work, I'd have something to do. He raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. It was defensive, but there was something else in the way his gaze lingered on me, like he was studying my reaction. Maybe if he weren't so stubborn, this would be easier. That was how it always went, barbs thrown like shields, disguising something neither of us wanted to name. But tonight, it didn't feel the same. The words didn't bite as hard as they used to. I reached for a stack of papers at the same time he did, and our hands brushed. Just skin against skin, brief, but it was enough to stop me cold. My chest tightened, and I felt the heat rush up my neck. Normally I'd pull away fast, maybe make a snide remark. But this time, I didn't move right away. Neither did he. His fingers twitched slightly against mine before he pulled back, dropping the papers onto the table like they were suddenly too heavy. The silence that followed wasn't the usual strained kind. It was different, thicker, heavier, but not sharp. My ears rang with it. I tried to focus again, eyes fixed on the page, but all I could think about was the warmth that lingered on my skin. And then, against my better judgment, I looked at him. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't annoyed. He was watching me with an expression I didn't recognize, something caught between curiosity and restraint. It unsettled me more than his glares ever had. He broke the gaze first, standing abruptly and crossing the room to grab another book from the shelf. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My heart was beating too fast for a moment that shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. It meant something I wasn't ready to name. When he came back, he didn't sit down right away. He hovered at the end of the table, flipping the book open, pretending to read. I could feel his presence. Every inch of space between us charged like static. The night dragged on, pages turning, pen scratching, but the air didn't lighten. If anything, it grew heavier with every passing minute. At some point, I glanced up again and caught him looking at me. Neither of us looked away this time. It was nothing more than a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. My stomach knotted, my throat dry, and in that stillness, I understood that whatever existed between us was no longer just rivalry. It was something else, something that scared me more than all the arguments we'd ever had. Finally, he closed his book softly and stepped toward the door. His hand lingered on the frame, his back half turned to me. I thought he might say something. I thought I might, too, but the words never came. Instead, he glanced back his eyes catching mine one last time, and then he was gone. The silence he left behind clung to me long after, heavier than anything we'd said out loud. And I couldn't stop replaying the way his hand had brushed mine, like a spark we weren't supposed to touch but couldn't quite avoid. The rain hadn't stopped all night. By the time we left the library, the streets were slick with it, and the last bus had already gone. I didn't have much of a choice but to follow him back to the small apartment he was renting near campus. He didn't exactly offer, just threw a look over his shoulder, muttered, "Come on," and started walking. I could have argued. I almost did. But the truth was, I didn't want to walk home alone in the storm. The place was smaller than I expected, one bedroom, a couch, and a kitchen barely wide enough to stand in. He tossed his bag to the floor and disappeared into the bathroom, leaving me standing awkwardly in the center of the room, dripping water onto his rug. When he came back, he was tugging a dry shirt over his head, hair damp from the quick towel he'd run through it. I looked away too fast, heart beating faster than it should have. "There's only one bed," he said flatly, like it was a fact that didn't matter. He nodded toward the couch. "You want it, it's yours." I hesitated. The couch looked uncomfortable, the cushions slouched and worn. My body ached from hours bent over books. "It's fine," I said quickly, though my voice betrayed me with a slight crack. He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself." But when the lights were off and the storm outside rattled the windows, I found myself lying awake on that lumpy couch, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing from the bed only a few feet away. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured him stretched out just beyond the shadows, his chest rising and falling, the faint scent of his cologne drifting across the room. It was maddening. "Still awake?" His voice came low, almost tentative, slicing through the darkness. I froze, unsure if I should answer. "Yeah," I finally whispered. A pause. Then, "You don't have to stay there. The couch is terrible. Just," I heard the sheets rustle. "There's room." I should have said no. I should have insisted I was fine. But my legs were already carrying me before my brain caught up. The mattress dipped as I sat, then slid carefully under the blanket, keeping as much distance between us as possible. Still, the warmth of his body radiated against mine, and it was unbearable how aware I became of every breath he took. "Don't steal the blanket," he murmured. There was a hint of amusement in his voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. I rolled my eyes in the dark. "Don't hog it, then." Normally, that would have sparked another round of jabs. Tonight, it just hung there, the silence stretching until it felt like something more. I could hear his breathing, slow and steady, but I couldn't relax. My chest tightened every time he shifted closer, every brush of fabric against fabric sending a current through me. At one point, his arm grazed mine, just a fraction of contact, barely noticeable, but my entire body went rigid. He didn't move away. Neither did I. The seconds dragged, heavy and electric. "You're tense," he said quietly. "I'm not." I lied, my voice too sharp to be convincing. He chuckled softly, and the sound sent an unexpected warmth through me. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't cold. It was gentle, and I hated that I liked it. For the first time, I realized how close his face was to mine. If I turned just slightly, I could make out the outline of his features, the curve of his mouth. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I looked away fast, staring at the ceiling like it held the answers I didn't want to face. "What?" he asked after a while, his tone cautious. "Nothing," I said too quickly. But it wasn't nothing. It was the way the silence between us felt different now. Less like a wall, more like a door we were both too afraid to open. At some point, he shifted again, his shoulder brushing mine. Neither of us moved. My heart was racing so fast, I thought he might hear it. I wanted to pull away, to create space, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. And then, unexpectedly, we laughed. Something small, a joke about how terrible the couch had been, or the storm outside refusing to quit. The kind of laugh that slips out without permission, soft and easy. It faded too quickly, leaving us both quiet again, but the air between us had changed. I lay awake long after, listening to the rhythm of his breathing beside me. My body hummed with awareness, every nerve alive, every thought tangled in confusion and panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to be the one person I couldn't stand. Yet, lying there in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, I knew I couldn't ignore the shift that had taken place. Something had cracked open between us. We didn't speak of it. We both pretended nothing had happened. But I could feel it lingering in the silence, in the warmth of his body so close to mine. And I knew, with a weight that pressed deep into my chest, that everything had just gotten far more complicated. The morning after the storm, everything felt strangely fragile, like the world had shifted during the night and hadn't quite settled back into place. He made coffee without a word, sliding a mug across the counter toward me. Our fingers almost touched when I took it, and I jerked my hand back too quickly, scalding my tongue on the first sip just to cover silence. He smirked faintly but didn't say anything. We didn't talk about sharing the bed. We didn't talk about the way his shoulder had brushed mine, or how the silence had felt more like a secret than avoidance. Instead, we carried on as if nothing had changed, burying ourselves in work, in half-hearted arguments over formatting and word choices. It was easier that way, until it wasn't. Later that week, we stayed late again, papers spread across the floor of the common room, laptops buzzing on the coffee table. My eyes blurred over the text, and when I looked up, he was frowning, rubbing his wrist. "What?" I asked, more sharply than I meant to. "Nothing," he muttered, shaking his hand out like he could will the pain away. But then he hissed when he tried to lift a stack of books. I rolled my eyes, though worry twisted in my stomach. "You're hopeless. Give it here." Before he could protest, I reached across and took his hand. His skin was warm, rougher than I expected, and the moment I pressed my fingers against his wrist, he stilled. Our eyes met, and the world seemed to collapse into that tiny space between us. I should have let go. I should have made a joke. Instead, I held on, feeling the steady thrum of his pulse beneath my touch. "Does it hurt here?" I asked quietly, my voice unfamiliar even to myself. He didn't answer right away. His gaze flickered down to where my fingers rested against the skin, then back up to my face. "It's fine," he said, though it came out softer than usual, almost careful. For a moment, everything stopped. The hum of the fluorescent light above, the distant chatter in the hallway, even my own breathing. It was just him, his hand in mine, the charged silence that stretched out until I thought it might break me. I didn't realize I was staring until he shifted slightly, leaning in just enough that I caught the faint scent of soap and cologne lingering on his skin. My chest tightened, and my grip loosened only because I was afraid of what it meant to keep holding on. But he didn't pull away. The brush of his arm against mine lingered, our shoulders almost touching now as if some invisible line had been erased. I felt the warmth of him seep into me, anchoring and unsteadying all at once. My throat went dry. I wanted to say something, anything. Instead, all I managed was a quiet, "You're terrible at taking care of yourself." He laughed softly, the sound low and almost private, and for the first time, it didn't feel like an enemy's laugh. It felt like something else, something meant only for me. The silence that followed was unbearable in the best way. Our eyes locked again, and neither of us looked away. I don't know how long it lasted, seconds, maybe minutes, but it felt suspended, infinite. Every breath, every flicker of movement became amplified. Then, almost instinctively, I shifted closer. My knee brushed his. He didn't move. His lips parted slightly, like he might speak, but no words came out. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, and I thought if I so much as breathed too loudly, it would shatter. Eventually, I forced myself to look away, dropping his hand gently onto his lap. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, but the charged air between us didn't dissipate. It clung to me, to the room, to every thought I had for the rest of the night. When I finally lay in bed later, I couldn't stop replaying it. The way of his hand in mine, the way his gaze had held me like it wanted to strip away every defense I'd built. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, but the truth pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Something was happening between us, something I couldn't explain and couldn't deny. As I drifted in and out of restless half-sleep, I thought I heard him whisper my name. Just faintly, just once, like a secret he hadn't meant to share. And in that suspended space between waking and dreaming, I let myself believe it. It had been days since that moment. His hand in mine, the silence that nearly broke me, and still I couldn't escape it. Every glance, every brush of his shoulder in passing, every unspoken pause seemed to echo with what we weren't saying. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just my head playing tricks. But deep down I knew, that night, we were in his apartment again, papers and books scattered like always. The project was almost done, but instead of relief, the room pulsed with something heavier. He was pacing, running his hands through his hair, frustrated about some detail I couldn't even focus on, because all I could see was the way his shirt clung to his back, damp with the humidity of the day. "You're impossible," he snapped suddenly, spinning toward me. "You don't listen, you don't—" He stopped mid-sentence, eyes locking onto mine. Whatever anger had been building cracked, and something else slipped through, something raw. I stood, matching his glare even though my chest was tight. "Say it. Just say what you're really thinking." His jaw clenched. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he laughed, short and nervous, rubbing the back of his neck. "You don't want me to." "Yes, I do," I said, though my voice trembled. The room went unbearably quiet. I could hear the rain starting again outside, faint against the glass, the hum of the fridge in the corner. And then, softer than I expected, he said, "You drive me insane. Not because I hate you. Because I don't." I froze. The words hung between us, fragile and terrifying. My breath caught, and for the first time, I didn't know how to respond. He looked away quickly, muttering, "Forget it. Just forget I said anything." But I couldn't. My body moved before my brain could stop it. I closed the space between us, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides like he was holding himself back. "Do you mean it?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. His eyes lifted to mine, unguarded in a way I had never seen before. I don't know how to stop. My chest tightened so painfully I thought I might break apart. "You're not supposed to." "I know," he cut in, his voice rough. "God, I know. But every time you're near me, He trailed off, shaking his head like the words refused to come out. I felt something in me unravel. For months, maybe longer, I buried away my heart skip when he walked into a room, the way my stomach twisted at every smirk and glare. And now, standing here with him, I couldn't hide it anymore. What if I said yes? I asked quietly. The question seemed to stop him cold. His eyes widened, breath catching, like he wasn't sure he'd heard me right. Then his face softened, and he took one hesitant step closer. We were so near now that the warmth of him pressed into me, our shoulders almost brushing. His hand lifted, hesitated, then dropped again, like he was afraid to touch me. "You don't know what you're saying," he whispered. "I do," I said, even though my voice trembled. "I'm terrified, but I do." The silence stretched again, thick with everything neither of us had the courage to name. And then, finally, he reached for me. His fingers brushed mine, tentative, trembling, and stayed there. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding, turning my hand just enough for our palms to meet. It was the smallest thing. Just touch, but it felt like the world shifted. He looked at me then, fully, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give. And in that gaze, I felt stripped bare. Every wall I'd built, every insult I'd thrown, every denial I clung to, all of it fell away. His lips parted, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly, carefully, he leaned in, not enough to close the distance, just enough to make it clear what he wanted, what he was asking. I could have pulled back. I could have laughed it off, buried it like we always did. But instead, I tilted forward and the space between us dissolved. The kiss was nothing like I expected. No fire, no battle, just warmth, soft and tentative, like he was afraid I might vanish if he pressed too hard. My heart raced, my hands trembling where they hovered at his sides. But I didn't pull away, not until he did, leaning back just slightly, eyes wide and uncertain. "Tell me I didn't just ruin everything," he murmured. I shook my head, unable to stop the small, unsteady smile tugging at my lips. You didn't. The relief in his face was almost painful to watch. He let out a shaky laugh, pressing his forehead to mine for just a moment, his breath warm against my skin. My chest swelled with something I didn't have a name for, something both terrifying and breathtaking. We sat down together on the edge of the bed, shoulders touching now without hesitation. His hand stayed on mine, thumb brushing slowly over my knuckles like he was trying to memorize the shape of me. I leaned into him, just slightly, and felt him exhale, his whole body easing like he'd been holding tension for far too long. For once, there was no sharpness between us. No rivalry, no barbs. Just this fragile, glowing thing that felt both impossible and inevitable. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow. I didn't know what this meant or how we would explain it to ourselves, let alone anyone else. All I knew was that I didn't want to let go. Not of him. Not now. And as his fingers tightened gently around mine, I realized with startling clarity that this boy I once swore I couldn't stand was now the only one I wanted to hold on to. The room felt different now. Not in the way furniture shifts when you rearrange it, but in the way air feels after a storm has passed. Lighter, charged, carrying the scent of something new. We sat side by side on the edge of his bed, shoulders touching, neither of us moving to create space. For the first time in what felt like forever, silence wasn't sharp. It wasn't something to fill. It was warm, steady, almost tender. He let out a small laugh, shaking his head. You realize how ridiculous we've been? I turned to him, my lips curving despite the nerves still buzzing in my chest. Ridiculous? All that fighting, he said, glancing at me with a half-smile. Arguing about everything. Whose method is better? Who knows more? Who's more stubborn? I raised a brow. That last one's still you. His laugh came freer this time. It was like hearing a melody I hadn't known I'd missed. Maybe, but still we wasted so much time. The words hit softer than I expected. I thought of all the sharp words, the heated stares, the ways we'd circled each other like enemies who couldn't admit they were drawn together. Maybe it hadn't been wasted, not entirely. Maybe every fight had been leading us here. Maybe we needed it. I murmured. The walls. The noise. Otherwise, this would have scared us sooner, he finished, his voice low. I nodded, because it was true. What sat between us now, this closeness, this pull, was terrifying. But it was also the safest I'd felt in a long time. He shifted, stretching his legs out and leaning back against the headboard. Without thinking, I mirrored him, my arm brushing his as I settled him beside him. The contact was casual, unplanned, but I didn't move away. Neither did he. You know, he said softly, staring at the ceiling, I used to think you hated me. I laughed, though there was no bite to it. I thought you hated me. I didn't, he said quickly, turning his head toward me. His eyes were steady, unflinching. I just didn't know how to deal with you. Something in my chest eased at that. Same. We fell quiet again, but it wasn't heavy. It was reflective, easy. I found myself tracing patterns against my thigh, restless, until his hand stilled mine. His fingers lingered just long enough to make my pulse jump, then retreated, as if unsure if they had permission to stay. I turned my palm upward, wordless, and waited. A heartbeat later, his hand found mine again, settling there with quiet certainty. The rivalry, the tension, the endless need to prove ourselves. It all seemed absurd now, compared to comfort his hand in mine. You realize we're going to be terrible at pretending nothing's changed, I said. He smirked. When were we ever good at pretending? That pulled another laugh from me, softer, freer. He shifted slightly, reaching for the blanket folded at the foot of the bed, tugging it over both of us without asking. It was a simple thing, but it felt symbolic, like drawing a line around us, like saying this is ours. We sat there wrapped in that thin fabric, our shoulders pressed together, our hands still intertwined. The outside world faded, the rain against the window muffling everything beyond these four walls. I don't know where this goes, I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. But I don't want it to end here. His thumb brushed against my hand, slow and deliberate. Neither do I. That was enough. We didn't need promises or plans. Not tonight. Gradually, the weight of the day pressed down on us, softening the edges of everything. My head drifted toward him, almost against my will, until it found the curve of his shoulder. He stilled for a moment, then leaned into me just enough to let me know it was welcome. The blanket warmed us. The steady rhythm of his breathing anchored me. My eyes grew heavy, though I fought to keep them open, afraid that if I closed them, the moment would vanish. But when I finally let them slip shut, I felt him shift closer, his voice barely audible. Good night. It wasn't a confession, not exactly, but it was enough. A quiet promise that whatever this was, it had begun. And as I drifted towards sleep, pressed against him beneath the shared blanket, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The morning light slipped quietly through the blinds, pale gold spilling across the floorboards and catching the edges of the blanket that still cocooned us. For a moment, waking felt strange, as though I had wandered into someone else's life. His shoulder was beneath my cheek, his breathing steady and slow, and the quiet hum of warmth between us told me that the night before hadn't been a dream. I stayed still, listening to the rhythm of him, afraid that moving would break the spell. The world outside was already stirring, doors opening in the hallway, footsteps echoing. But inside this room, time seemed to linger just for us. When he shifted slightly, I thought he was about to pull away. Instead, his hand found mine beneath the blanket, curling loosely around my fingers. A small gesture, almost unconscious, but it anchored me more deeply than anything else could. My chest tightened, not with panic this time, but with something softer. We didn't speak right away. Words felt unnecessary in that fragile, in-between hour. Eventually, though, he stretched and slipped out of bed, his hair a mess, his shirt rumpled. I watched him move about the room, pulling on socks, glancing back at me with a sheepish kind of smile that made my stomach turn in quiet somersaults. He poured coffee for both of us, but instead of taking the first sip himself, he placed a mug into my hands. Here, you need it more than I do. I almost laughed at the casualness of it, at how something so simple could feel like proof that the ground beneath us had shifted. Thanks, I murmured, fingers brushing as I took it. The heat of the cup seeped into my palms, but it wasn't half as warming as the way he was looking at me, like he was still trying to figure out if this was real, too. We settled at the small table, the silence between us no longer edged with competition, but softened by something unspoken. He teased me lightly about my bedhead, and I fired back about his inability to pour a proper cup without spilling. It was the same banter, but not the same at all. Underneath the laughter was care, the kind that snuck into the cracks of rivalry when neither of us had been paying attention. Somewhere in the middle of our conversation, I caught myself staring, noticing the way the morning light caught on his jawline, the curve of his smile, the ease that had replaced the old stiffness in his shoulders. It hit me then, how quickly everything had transformed. This wasn't an enemy. This wasn't even just a rival. Somewhere between the sharp words and the long nights, between the stolen glances and unspoken moments, something had changed. Love hadn't announced itself with fireworks. It had crept in slowly, quietly, through every small crack we left open, until suddenly it was here, unmistakable. Later, when we finally stepped outside, the air was crisp, the sky pale and wide. We walked side by side, not touching, not speaking, but every step seemed to echo with a knowledge of what had shifted between us. At one point, he glanced at me, and I met his gaze, and in that brief moment, everything we couldn't yet say was there. A promise, a beginning. As the sunlight stretched across the path before us, I realized something simple but profound. Love doesn't always arrive the way you expect it. Sometimes it hides in the space between sharp words, in the warmth of the shared blanket, in the silence that feels like safety. And as we walked forward together, I held on to the beauty of it, the unexpected, undeniable truth that in him I had found something real.